Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com, is here. What's going on, Durso?
Not much, Mike. How are you?
I'm doing good, man. We've got Flyers news in the middle of the playoffs for a team that didn't make the playoffs. This is unbelievable, right?
It is a little bit. The only reason I'm saying a little bit is because last year in the middle of the Stanley Cup final, they made a trade that kind of came out of nowhere at the time, too. So they've been known for making a little bit of headlines during the playoffs, even when they're not involved. But certainly this one's got the potential to be a big deal if it happens to go the course that it looks like it could.
All right, so let's get into this. Michkov is drafted 7th in last year's draft. Is it fair to say if he did not have the contractual issues that he potentially has, that he would have gone higher?
Absolutely. He was that kind of talent. Probably, I don't think anybody was supplanting Connor Bedard as the number 1 pick, but safe to say he would have probably been 2 or 3 easily, if not for the situation, kind of everything with the Russian landscape at the time. That was really the big hurdle. So when he slipped to 7 where the Flyers were, it became a little bit more of a go ahead and take a swing kind of thing. The potential of this player, if you can wait out the timeline or see something through sooner than that, could be worth it.
Right. So give us what we know right now on this whole, Sunday night, this random, thought of, hey, this guy could get out of his KHL contract and come play for Philadelphia. Where does this come from, and where does that stand?
I think it's a question that's always going to be asked as long as he's not actively playing. And part of the question comes from how he was utilized last season. Michkov was under contract with CSKA St. Petersburg, which is one of the primary teams in the KHL, and really didn't see a lot of playing time, wasn't seeing a significant role when he was playing. So he ultimately later got loaned to another KHL team and played out the season there. The team wasn't very good. At his age, 18, 19 years old, freshly drafted to an NHL team, he was pretty much the best player on that KHL team in Sochi. So that tells you how talented he could be, and he was playing on a team that really didn't have any playoff hopes. And that brings into question, does he see a future in the KHL for the rest of this contract as well? So that's where the question comes from. The key to remember with this whole situation about whether or not he can come to the NHL is that the Flyers really have no control over this. They cannot just buy out the contract with whatever money they can supply. Michkov and his agent have to do all of the legwork here. Now, that being said...
So wait, hold on. So is it a point... This is where it's a little confused. So the Flyers aren't even... They don't know what... do we think that's... Do they know what's going on and they just don't say anything? Or are they up in the dark on the situation?
I wouldn't say they're in the dark. I don't expect Danny Briere to come out and just say anything affirmative about this. But then again, I go back to his comments at the end of the season, and Danny Briere basically said, if there's a way, we'd love to have him. So if there's a way, the Flyers are certainly going to be waiting and seeing if this is a possibility. And if it is, I'm sure that they are prepared to come to the table with an entry-level contract to allow him to play. There are stipulations around this whole thing, though. So first of all, like I said, Michkov and his agent would have to pay off the contract. It's, according to reports, it's not all that expensive of a contract when you consider the value of an entry-level contract in the NHL. It's really roughly about $400,000 in terms of U.S. money. But that's still something that the player and his agent have to completely take care of. And the Flyers cannot be involved with an entry-level contract until after that is taken care of and he is out of that contract. And it's not going to fully terminate the rights to having Michkov in the KHL. It's just going to terminate the active contract. So what the KHL and what Mishkov's team over there is worried about kind of at that point is if he were to come over to the Flyers and sign an entry-level deal and they were not going to utilize him in the KHL for the next 2 years like he was previously under contract for, they basically want to see that it's either NHL or bust for Michkov. If he were to play in the AHL, he's got to go back, basically. That's a stipulation that would have to go into the contract, is that he's going over. If he's going to go to North America, if he's going to go play in the Flyers organization, it is for the Flyers and nobody else. It would be come play in the NHL and do your part to help that team, because that's the ultimate destination. If that's not part of the equation, he basically goes right back to Russia.
All right, so because the thought process is hearing all this is this guy was the 7th pick. He would have been a higher pick. If he was quote unquote, an American-born player and was drafted, or a Canadian-born player, would he have been right with the Flyers on draft day?
There's reason to believe so, certainly, and that's kind of gauge the excitement level, because people hear Matvei Michkov's name anymore around the Flyers. The Flyers fan base does, and they're pretty much salivating over this kid. They're waiting for somebody of this talent level to be in place. The equivalent that I can bring for people is that the Flyers haven't drafted a player of this potential level since Eric Lindros. Straight up, they have not had a player with this level of potential since they got the rights to Lindros at that draft. And that really tells you the significance of what Matvei Michkov could be to this organization. And certainly if he was the average player, yeah, I think that, the average player who was in North America already, I think he would have probably been considered. Well, we wouldn't be talking about him as a Flyer. Let's put it that way. He would have been gone to somebody else, and he probably would have played last year with the likes of Connor Bedard, and Adam Fantilli went in the top 4 and played immediately. And so did Leo Carlson, who went to the Anaheim Ducks at 2nd overall. So the first 3 picks all played at NHL level,
right,
and there's certainly reason to believe that Michkov would have been in that group.
Right. I mean, for the last couple of years, these teams that have been drafting very high have prospered with these players that have been getting drafted, where the Flyers have not, for one of these reasons. They haven't been bad enough. They also are in a situation where they drafted a player who was not coming over here. So what would be the impact of this happening? What does that do to change the timeline of where this organization is? Because one of the problems seemingly has been they just missed out on the playoff. They weren't bad enough to get the good draft pick. They kind of been stuck in that limbo. What would this do to their timeline?
It would certainly make things more interesting. And I was already even without this, I was already expecting the potential that they try to do something very creative and make a little bit of a splash in the offseason, kind of in an outside sort of way, like out of the box sort of way. I wasn't expecting them to go out and just sign a big name free agent or something like that. I think it was too soon for that. But that's where this part of the equation comes in, because what if you do know for sure, especially it's May 21st, in another week or so, if you can get to, before the Stanley Cup is awarded and you have this player coming over, how does that change your approach in the draft, in free agency? Does that change a lot of what your offseason plans are? And I think that's why the Flyers are eagerly waiting for a resolution to this. If they know that there's no shot that this happens, and I've always said, since day one when it came to everything with Michkov, tread lightly on the situation. They didn't disclose anything about how he even had a visit to North America to see the facility before they drafted him. So they were in talks with him about drafting him before it ever happened, and nobody knew. Nobody knew about Ivan Fedotov either. So it seems like things like this go really under wraps, and the Flyers don't want a lot of information out there because they don't want to damage the communication line between themselves and the Russian leagues and things like that, because it seems like they have a good line of communication when you consider how the Fedotov thing went and getting him over. So certainly they're being cautious with it, and I think that cautious optimism is the key word right now. But if they were to know this information by mid-June, how would it change what they do surrounding the draft and free agency? Any trades they would make in the offseason? Would they go bigger for something and try to get more high-end talent in immediately? Because you would be adding a high-end talent level player just by virtue of making a draft pick that you took a swing on and finding out that you didn't have to wait 3 years for him. You only had to wait a year. I'm still not, certain that this is going to happen for this season, but I do think it certainly opens the line of communication and the line of possibilities that I don't think they're going to have to wait 3 years to get the guy either. I think that they're going to be able to get him sooner than expected. The question just is, will this all come to fruition in a matter of weeks? Because I think the Flyers need that resolution to really make this happen. I don't think they want to sit there waiting all offseason and put their plans on hold to wait for whether or not Michkov plays to decide how they go about this.
Yeah, talking with 97.3 ESPN.com Flyers insider Kevin Durso. Matvei Michkov could be coming over. So I don't know. How would you prognosticate? Let's say we now know he's here. He's on the roster. Where does he fit in immediately?
Pretty close to the top, I would imagine. I mean, I can't imagine him coming over and having the talent level that he possesses and seeing some of the things that he's been able to do in the KHL, just watching some of the highlights and things like that. At the very least, I would think that they would want to put a lot of emphasis on seeing what he can handle. I don't. You're not bringing him over to be on the fourth line.
Right.
You're not bringing him over to just.
Well, that's what we're
get his
saying. Like,
feet
is
wet.
he
You're
coming
bringing
in
him
and
over to make an impact?
He's the centerman for the top line here? Is that what we're talking about?
I'd be curious to see how they utilize him. I know he's tried some center in the past. He was more labeled a winger. Either way, I think the immediate impact is top six for sure, maybe top line, even if he looks that good coming out of camp, and certainly power play minutes. I mean, for the team that's had the worst power play in the league 3 years running, there would be almost, I would have to imagine a player of his caliber and his skill set would have an immediate impact there at least. 5-on-5, we would have to see a little bit more of how he handles. It's different rink dimensions. It's going to be a different style of play for him. But certainly when you can bring that skill level into play and you can get more creative when there's more space and more of an opportunity like a power play, I think that would be an immediate place you would put him as top power play for sure.
All right. Kevin Durso with us here. When does I guess you got to finish the playoffs, obviously, here, but when does the offseason kind of start to pick up and all the stuff start happening? Because, like, the NBA, the playoffs are still going on, and it feels like everybody's talking about trades and free agency and everything here. When will that start to heat up for the Pucks?
Well, it could, certainly there are things that the Flyers could do before the Stanley Cup is awarded. They did that last year. They made a trade. I think it was following Game 2 of the Stanley Cup Final was when the Provorov trade went down. So they had the ability to still make that happen with teams that are no longer in the running, I suppose. And you're down to 4 now, so there's plenty of teams that are already working on their offseason plan. The real heat of the offseason comes almost immediately. I believe the last possible day for the Stanley Cup Final is June 24th. It's really late. It's gotten later as the years have gone on. They put more travel days and off days into the schedule. I'm not a fan of that personally because it means that all of the main offseason stuff is right on the heels of the Stanley Cup being awarded. But the draft is the following weekend. It's that Friday and Saturday after that. So it's June 28th and 29th is the draft. And that is less about, maybe less about, in terms of this offseason, less about who the Flyers are drafting and the possibility that there would be trades involving players because they certainly got active around that time last year. And then you also have free agency, which typically opens on July 1st. That's a week after the Stanley Cup is awarded.
Yep.
So everything heats up super quick after the Stanley Cup is awarded. And it's all within a span of about 5 days. And usually the heat of free agency from day one, July 1st, is over within the week. Usually you don't hear many signings after July 4th or 5th. So it's all going to happen really quick in that week to 2 week span. And that's really where the impact is. And that's why I'm curious about with this situation, the fact that we're talking so much about these rumors right now maybe means that a resolution could be sooner rather than later. I'm sure the Flyers want that because to know that by mid-June and set the stage for what could be in the draft and free agency and all of that, it would be vital to their offseason plans if they're going to kind of pivot on this, if they know they've got this player versus they don't, and you're leaning more towards another year of the rebuild process.
So who ultimately are we waiting on here? The KHL team, the player, how does this get resolved?
So the Flyers are mainly waiting on both sides of that equation because the player and his agent, Michkov and his agent, have the ability to, if they can come up with the money, they can terminate the contract by buying it out. Simple as that. But at the same time, the team that he plays for has to be open to that. It sounds like there's a discussion and an open line of communication between those two sides as well. His KHL team has said they want what's best for him and his development. So if they think that means, him buying it out and going to the NHL is what will be best for him, they'll allow it to happen if he can come up with the money. And that's the ultimate goal here at this point, I would say, is if he can come up with a way to get himself out of it, the Flyers will be waiting with contract in hand, I'm sure. And all his KHL team is really asking in return is, as long as he's utilized at the NHL level, this will be fine. But if he's not, he's got to come back. You're going to loan him back. Simple as that. So that's what everybody's waiting on. And if the negotiations can go well, that basically all three parties get what they want. Michkov gets to play where he hopefully wants to play. It sounds like he wants to have the opportunity to play in the NHL. Right around the time that the draft happened, not long before the draft, his father had passed away, and there's a reason to believe people believe he may just want to leave the general area. It reminds him too much of that he gets a new beginning if he goes to North America.
There's a lot of these. Correct me if I'm wrong, though. A lot of these times it's either the team has the control, they don't want to let him go, or it's monetary. They make more money there if they leave early, then you're losing money. I mean, that's like that happens in the NBA anyway. Like Saric, he was making money over where he was playing, and it would have been a pay cut for him to come to the NBA.
Sure, and that's part of what people are wondering about the Flyer side of this too, is that if he's got to pay his own way to get over here, basically, to pay to terminate the contract, there's only so much of a limit they can give on an entry-level deal. They can't pay much, from a cap hit standpoint, they can't pay him much more than that, but they could layer this with performance bonuses and things like that that could help make some of the money back and help that in that regard. But again, that's not something that they can really take care of until they know they can offer the contract. Right. So they need to wait for that first and foremost.
Kevin Durso, our Flyers insider, 97.3 ESPN.com. The NHL playoffs are continuing on to the conference finals. And we will certainly tap into Durso as soon as any Flyers news happens. But that was buzzing over Sunday night into Monday, and we'll hear what happens with that. Hopefully there's some clarity on that soon. Kevin Durso, good to see you, pal.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it.
All right, Kevin Durso, everybody, our Flyers insider from 97.3 ESPN.com.